Hi everyone, you're very welcome to this talk for Heritage Week. My name is Abbie, and some of you may remember me from my time working in the centre at Aughrim. Normally for Heritage Week, our group hold talks in the centre, but due to COVID-19, our events this year are all held online. Today I'm going to be talking about Aughrim and the Boyne, and the reasons why Aughrim has become the lesser known of the two, despite being the more significant. So it's no secret that of these two battles, Aughrim is kind of the forgotten cousin. The Boyne is very well known and has been the subject of TV documentaries and historical fiction books and all that kind of stuff. Aughrim, meanwhile, has earned the dubious nickname of Ireland's forgotten battle. This is despite the fact that Aughrim was the more significant event of the two, and the bloodier. We're going to look at the factors that may have contributed to the disparity in fame between the two, such as the main people that fought there, the numbers of troops and casualties involved, the reception that each was given by both modern and the press of the time, and that all-important change to the calendar. So, our persons of interest. At the Boyne, both James and William were on the battlefield. William had chronic asthma, and there is one description of him as small, thin, hook-nosed and stooped with a hacking cough. He was known to be reserved and loved hunting. James II, on the other hand, was said to have been graceful, above average height, and had the reputation of being a bit of a ladies' man in his youth. The Boyne is the only time the two would meet, and I suppose this is what gives it the X factor, if you can call it that. The art and the depictions of this are all very grand and have a kind of imperial air about them. In comparison to this, at Aughrim, two generals were in charge. General Godard van Ried de Ginkel, who was a Dutch native, was commanded the Williamites. Ginkel could speak several languages and had got his first commission in the army aged 12. He was very devoted to William and was a cautious general. For the Jacobites, we have Charles Chaumont, the Marquis de Saint-Roux. He was a French general who had earned the nickname the Hammer of the Huguenots due to his fierce defence of the Catholic faith. He had some military successes in his native country, but interestingly, we don't know what he looked like, as there are no surviving portraits of him. The only other bit of information we have is that he was supposed to be a notorious wife-beater, and his wife apparently begged the king to send him away from the court. Saint-Roux died at Aughrim after his head was taken off by a cannonball, and although Aughrim may be Ireland's forgotten battle, that does seem to be the one piece of information that most people retain about it. So to the numbers, and we'll start with the Boyne and give a little bit of background before we delve into them. The best estimates put 56,000 troops in total on the field at the Boyne. Now, that is a huge amount of men, but the Battle of the Boyne occurred over a large area. You can see there on the map that William's camp was on the north side of the river. James's was on the south side, with the two armies facing each other. The plan was to essentially trap the Jacobite army in a pincer movement. William sent 10,000 men towards Slane, which drew the bulk of the Jacobites upstream in response. With 1,300 Jacobites posted in Drogheda, only 6,000 were left at Oldbridge to confront 26,000 Williamites. All the fighting took place on the south side of the river, as the vastly outnumbered Jacobites defended their position against the advancing Williamites. William himself crossed at Drybridge with 3,500 mounted troops. A reverend called George Story wrote an account of the war in Ireland, called The True and Impartial History of Ireland. Now, it may be true, but it's definitely not impartial, and as such, we need to treat the numbers with a little bit of caution. Story puts the losses at the Boyne at between 1,000 and 1,500 for the Jacobites, and a mere 400 for William's force. As I mentioned above, the best estimate puts 56,000 troops in total on the field, 32,000 Williamites and 24,000 Jacobites. In total, approximately 1,500 soldiers were killed at the Boyne, which, as we'll see in comparison to Aughrim, is really only a skirmish. At Aughrim, the Jacobite army used Kilcommodon Hill to their advantage and drew up their defences there. In front of the hill, facing east, was a great swathe of bog that could only be crossed by a narrow causeway. This causeway was guarded on its western end by the ruins of an old castle. The only way for the Williamites to attack was to either force their way across the bog or the causeway. Throughout the day, Ginkel watched as his men floundered through the bog, getting picked off by Jacobite musketeers, who used the hedgerows to their advantage. The day was going well, and Sanru was riding down in support when a cannonball took his head from his shoulders. The army floundered, and what should have been a rock-solid defence at the causeway broke. This was due to a combination of the fire flagging from Burke's regiment inside the castle, and from the fact that the battalion stationed the far side of the village turned and fled from the field. The result was carnage. George Story claims that the Williamite army killed 7,000 of the army upon the spot. By this he means during the retreat, and that they took about 400 prisoners. The Williamite dead he lists as 73 officers, with 111 wounded, 600 soldiers were killed, and 960 wounded. John Evelyn, who was a diarist of the period, wrote, "The General Sanru was slain, which deprives them of their best commander, nor was it cheap for us, near 1,000 killed, but of them 4 to 5,000. Ginkle himself in a letter to William said that 4,000 dead lie at the battlefield. I think that the exact numbers involved will always be somewhat of a question mark, because the sources of the time had their own motivations behind fiddling the numbers. But one thing cannot be disputed is that the Jacobites lost thousands, and that most of this occurred during the retreat. This feeds into my next point, which is the reception that both of these battles were given at the time and their perception in modern times. The Boyne provided a great backdrop for the peace process, and it was indeed seen as a symbol of the Republic and the North coming together. Ian Paisley gave over a musket used at the Boyne to Bertie Ahern, although I think it was actually taken back after the photos were finished. A replica remains at the centre though. The Boyne is featured prominently on the banners during the celebrations of the 12th in the north of Ireland, which I'll talk about again in a moment. The image on the screen depicts William crossing the Boyne, while James is in such a hurry to get away that he's lost his wig. The image dates from the late 1800s and shows that James's reputation still hadn't recovered. In the immediate aftermath of the Boyne, the Jacobite troops were described as an unorganised rabble. The Jacobite captain, named Stevens of the Grand Prior's Regiment, wrote that only the French can be said to have rallied, and the performance of the Irish was deplorable. James departed immediately after the battle, and upon his return he was said to have remarked to Lady Tyrconnell that his men were well able to run. She replied, "But your Majesty, you seem to have won the race." Amongst his own men, James's departure was not well received, and earned him the nickname of Seamus a Caca, James the Shit. What is interesting about James leaving is that it influenced the way that the battle was thought of. If he had retreated but gone to Limerick with the troops, then the Boyne would have been seen as a mere skirmish followed by an organised retreat. It's really James's own actions that cemented the Boyne as a Williamite victory, when really it was still all to play for. It's a very different story at Aughrim. It's generally agreed that the Williamites were on the back foot until the death of Sanru, and although it's easy to speculate on what could have been, it did indeed seem that a Jacobite victory was on the cards that day. Sanru himself was convinced that his troops could beat the opposition back to the gates of Dublin. Story wrote grudgingly that the Irish fought like men of another nation, and it's generally held that the Jacobites gave a good account of themselves that day. The flip side of this is that the retreat, when it came, was devastating. There's a Danish account that is particularly harrowing to read that describes Jacobite soldiers begging to be put out of their misery while their counterparts refused, as he put it, denying them the final mercy of the sword. Numbers alone don't really tell just how devastating Aughrim was, but the first-hand accounts paint a bloody picture, particularly in comparison to the Boyne. Aughrim really was the final nail in the coffin for the Jacobites, and was seen as a key victory. The image on screen was commissioned to show William's victories during the war, and it includes Aughrim in prime place. So I briefly mentioned the 12th earlier, and I can't finish up without mentioning that infamous calendar change. The Boyne took place on the 1st of July 1690. Aughrim took place on the 12th of July 1691. So when the organisations that were the precursors to the Orange Order initially began their celebrations on the 12th of July, it was Aughrim that they were celebrating, not the Boyne. As most of you will know, the calendar changed from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian one in the 1750s with a difference of 11 days. The change meant that the Boyne became the 12th and therefore became the one that was celebrated and the household name. Now, due to the way each calendar worked out leap years, the difference has actually increased by a day with each passing century. That means that currently there are 13 days in the difference, meaning that Aughrim is actually July the 25th and the Boyne is the 14th. So I hope you've enjoyed that and that you'll tune into the other talks that we'll be putting up during the week. If you're looking for a tour of the battlefield, please get in touch either on Facebook or Twitter and we'll see what we can do for you. Until next time, Slán.